why the termites left their home. They were wide awake, they were more clever than we are, they knew that the storm was coming." Finding that this was all the worthy entomologist had to communicate, Dick without comment turned back again to his operation. Again the gurgling noise, again the water's upward rush. For the second time he had failed to effect an aperture to the outer air. The situation was to the last degree becoming alarming. The water had all but reached Mrs. Weldon, and she was obliged to take her boy into her arms. Every one felt nearly stifled. A loud singing was heard in the ears, and the lantern showed barely any light at all. A few minutes more, and the air would be incapable of supporting life. One chance alone remained: they must bore another hole at the very summit of the cone. Not that they were unaware of the imminent danger of this measure, for if the ant hill were really submerged, the water from below would immediately expel the remaining air, and death must be instantaneous. A few brief words from Dick explained the emergency of the crisis. Mrs. Weldon recognized the necessity. "Yes, Dick, do it. There is nothing else to be done." While she was speaking the light flickered out, and they were in total darkness. Mounted on the shoulders of Hercules, who was crouching in one of the side cells, his head only just above the water, Dick proceeded to force the ramrod into the clay, which at the vertex of the ant hill was considerably harder and thicker than elsewhere. A strange mingling of hope and fear thrilled through Dick Sands as he applied his hand to make the opening which was to admit life and air or the flood of death. The silence of the general expectation was broken by the noise of a sharp hissing. The water rose for 8 inches, but all at once it ceased to rise. It had found its level. No need this time to close the orifice. The top of the ant hill was higher than the top of the flood, and for the present at least they could all rejoice that their lives were spared. A general cheer, led by the stentorian voice of Hercules, involuntarily broke from the party. Cutlasses were brought into action, and the clay crumbled away beneath the vigorous assault that was made upon it. The welcome air was admitted through the new made aperture, bringing with it the first rays of the rising sun. The summit of the ant hill once removed, it would be quite easy to clamber to the top, whence it was hoped they would soon get away to some high ground out of reach of the flood. Dick was the first to mount the summit, but a cry of dismay burst from his lips. A sound only too well known to travellers in Africa broke upon his ear. That sound was the whizzing of arrows. Hardly 100 yards away was a large encampment, whilst in the water, quite close to the ant hill where he stood, he saw some long boats full of natives. For one of these had come of the volley of arrows which had greeted his appearance above the opening of the cone. To tell his people what had happened was the work of a moment. He seized his gun and made Hercules, Bat, and Actæon take theirs, and all fired simultaneously at the nearest boat. Several of the natives were seen to fall, but shouts of defiance were raised, and the shots were fired in return. Resistance was manifestly useless. What could they do against 100 natives? They were assailed on every hand. In accordance with what seemed a preconcerted plan, they were carried off from the ant hill with brutal violence, in two parties, without the chance of a farewell word or sign. Dick Sands saw that Mrs. Weldon, Jack, and Cousin Benedict were placed on board one boat, and were conveyed towards the camp, whilst he himself, with the 5 negroes and old Nan, was forced into another, and taken in a different direction. 20 natives formed a bodyguard around them, and 5 boats followed in the rear. Useless though it were, Dick and the negroes made one desperate attempt to maintain their freedom. They wounded several of their antagonists, and would doubtless have paid their lives as a penalty for their daring, if there had not been special orders given that they should be taken alive. The passage of the flood was soon accomplished. The boat had barely touched the shore when Hercules with a tremendous bound sprang on to the land. Instantly 2 natives rushed upon him. The giant clave their skulls with the butt end of his gun, and made off. Followed though he was by a storm of bullets, he escaped in safety, and disappeared beneath the cover of the woods. Dick Sands and the others were guarded to the shore, and fettered like slaves. End of Part the Second, Chapter 6. Recording by Alex C. Talander, Davis, California. www.alexctalander.com